This is the brand new updated MJX 10208, and in today's video, we're going to compare it to the original, tear it apart, see exactly what's new in it, and see if it's worth that updated price. The original 10208 was a really cool car. It had some great features, but definitely had some drawbacks. In most people's eyes, the main drawback was the suspension. The arms are pretty narrow and don't have a ton of down travel. And whereas I found the truck still handled pretty decently, it definitely could have been better. They also used way too much Loctite in a few places, and there were definitely some other areas that needed improvement. The new one looks very similar, but is definitely different in some key areas. The first problem from the original truck was this latch. Sometimes it would come undone. I don't think they've changed anything here. Fortunately, you can just tighten up these 4 screws, which makes this latch tighter and basically prevents that problem. The bodies themselves do appear to be identical, which is just fine because the original body worked really well, and that internal cage is nice and strong. Underneath the body is the main obvious difference. This truck is quite a bit wider than the original version. As you can see here, they've made it basically a full inch wider. In order to do that, they've made quite a few changes to the suspension, and they've also beefed up some things. At the same time, it looks like they've really increased suspension down travel. Let's rip these things apart and see exactly how they did that. First things first, let's see if there's any changes to the tires. No, it doesn't look like they've done any updates to the wheels or tires. The old one and the new one look exactly identical. I'm definitely curious to see how this new suspension setup changes the handling. I, for one, thought that the original one handled pretty darn well. More suspension travel and a wider track can definitely make the truck handle completely differently. If it's done correctly, it could be a good thing. Putting these two together, we can see that the front hubs look like they are identical, though the hexes are a slightly different design. The rear hubs also look the same, again though, with those slightly different hexes. These steering links are definitely new though. Let's take a closer look. While we're taking this apart, we're going to be paying close attention to these nuts. MJX uses Threadlock in these, and they're only held in with plastic, and I had a couple of them strip out on me before. This problem could be solved by just using Nylock nuts. However, this Threadlock does feel a little bit weaker than what they were using before, so this is also a decent solution. The updated screws appear to be using a pre-applied Threadlock that wasn't on the old ones. This will allow for more consistency and will probably stop those nuts from stripping out in the holes. And again, we can see the remnants of that pre-applied Threadlock right there. Taking a look at these steering links, we can see the only thing that's changed on them is this center turnbuckle. Fortunately, as opposed to just extending the threads out, they decided to extend the hex out, which will make this a lot stronger than it would have been if they had just made these threads longer. That was a good choice. That being said, the upper links have been improved even more. In order to remove the inner screw, we need to remove this rear bumper. As you can see here, they really want you to use the wheelie bar, so when we test this, we're gonna go ahead and not do that. This rear bumper is different, but it's only different to accommodate a change in the chassis. We'll look at that in a few minutes. As you can see, not only are the new links longer, but they're a lot thicker on the ends too. This extra beefiness should really help these from getting pulled out of the balls. One thing they omitted are the washers on the screws. The original link had these washers, which would prevent complete separation, but then again wouldn't prevent the ball from coming out. So it's kind of a band-aid. I'm guessing they don't need that anymore because of how thick this is. They're expecting it not to fail. I guess we'll see when we bash it. Now I'm really curious to know where all that extra down travel is coming from. Let's see if it's from the shocks. Looking at these two shocks, I'm actually surprised to see that they're basically identical. They're the same length, have the same amount of up travel, and the same amount of down travel. The only difference I see are these springs. The original spring has one more coil in it, which means the new spring is going to be a little bit stiffer. That's kind of surprising to me because the suspension was already pretty stiff to begin with, but we'll have to see how it works out. Since those are the same, the extra down travel must be coming from something in the geometry, but before we take a look at that, I hear the motor mount's different and maybe even the center differential. To get into that, we're going to have to remove this center brace. This is one place I really ran into trouble on the original one. It had so much Threadlock in it, it actually stalled out my screwdriver, which has only happened once or twice before. Let's see how it does on the updated version. All right, that was pretty easy. And as you can see, again, pre-applied Threadlock, so kind of hard to mess that up. Great to see. Has the front been given the same treatment? Yep, very easy, so it appears as though the Threadlock problem has been solved. And pulling this battery out, we can see this is the same 5,000 milliamp hour 3S battery that was available before. In this case, though, in the Amazon version, it's going to be included. This is actually a pretty good battery. I've been using mine in a bunch of different vehicles, and I've been very happy with it. You know, guys, lights are a really nice inclusion on an RC car, but honestly, sometimes I think they're more trouble than they're worth. The constant wire management's a real pain in the butt. What do you think? Would you rather have the lights or not have to deal with the wiring management all the time? Removing this cover gives us access to some more new parts. Let's pull the old one off and see what they've changed. So as you can see here, under the hood, they've made some pretty major improvements. The old motor mount was just this small piece of metal that was only attached by a couple of screws underneath. On the new version, that motor mount extends all the way across the chassis, is braced in the front, and the chassis has additional bracing ribs, which the original chassis did not have. That should make that motor mount quite a bit stronger and should be able to handle a lot more power and abuse. Now, they also replaced the center differential, but these two look identical to me, so we're gonna have to dig in a little bit further. That original mount was only held in with 2 screws. This updated one's held in with no fewer than 5. Now that means this thing's gonna be a lot stronger, but it also means that the already pretty monumental task of getting this center differential out has gotten even harder. Pulling this center differential out has revealed the update they made, and that's including this much larger support bearing. The original one was pretty tiny, and mine already feels kind of crunchy. This is a great update. All right, let me get this mess back together, then we'll see what they're doing to get that additional down travel. Before I put it together though, I wanted to mention that they have updated the grease they're using. This grease feels new and smells nice. That's in stark contrast to the grease they were using before, which seemed like it was scooped out of the bottom of an old machine. While I'm putting this together, why don't you go ahead and let me know you like this video by hitting that subscribe button. Let's check out that rear arm mount. As you can see, they've updated this entire mounting area. The D block is the same, but this whole piece is completely different. The original had this stamped sheet metal skid and C block combination, and I guess they decided that wasn't strong enough. However, the front has stayed exactly the same. The arms, however, are very different. As you can see here, the arms are a similar design, but obviously this one's longer. The shock mounts further out on the arm as well, so that's not where we're getting our additional droop from. These drive shafts look identical, except for, of course, this one's longer. And then, of course, like I said, the upper links are quite a bit thicker on the new one. That being said, I just realized where they're getting the extra droop from, and that's from revised shock towers. This shock tower is wider and lower than this shock tower, and they are also revised in the front. That moves the shocks themselves down, which gives us more down travel, but then less up travel, which is somewhat accommodated for by the wider shock tower, but we'll just have to see how that works when we bash it. Now, the last thing I want to do before we pop in this included battery and test this thing out, and don't worry, we're going to be putting it on 4S, assuming it survives 3S. I want to make sure this ESC still works the same as it did before. As you can see here, this actually has Bluetooth connectivity, and it's really nice because it actually connects very, very quickly, and I've had no problems updating the settings on this thing. In my experience, it actually works better than the Bluetooth connectivity on the Hobbywing ESCs. Everything in here looks fine, though I am going to set the BEC voltage to 7.4 volts because the included servo is 7.4 volts compatible and works a lot better on 7.4 volts. Everything looks fine in the electronics. All these electronics look the same as the previous version. And that includes this transmitter, which I'm a little disappointed to see they didn't update. It's got everything you need, but overall, it's a pretty cheap transmitter, and I'd love to see a better one. Now, before we continue on, let's address the elephant in the room, and that is, I thought there wasn't going to be a V2, and yeah, that's what I thought too. I told you exactly what MJX told me, and to be fair, the first batch that they shipped out was the original version, but clearly they were working on this one, so enough talk, let's pop a battery in this thing and see what she can do. Well guys, that definitely feels better than it did before. It is still over dampened for general bashing, which means that it tends to wind up on its back a lot because it bounces around in rough terrain. That might be a benefit for big jumps though, which we're gonna find out in just a minute. Before that though, it occurred to me that some of you might not be familiar with this platform, so let me go over the basics of what you get. You get a standard Amazon special 35 kg servo, which works just fine, but is kind of slow. There's a 100 amp Bluetooth programmable 4S ESC with matching motor. Both of those have fans on them. You get a nice big tower-to-tower brace, an all-metal drivetrain including pinion, spur gear, differentials, output cups, CVDs front and rear, and metal wheel hexes. A pretty decent servo saver. All of your links are in double shear, which makes them quite a bit stronger. Some nice hybrid plastic aluminum threaded body big bore shocks with shock protectors on the arms, lights in the front and rear, a full plastic chassis with aluminum and steel A, B, C, and D blocks, which are pretty strong, especially these rears seem nice and sturdy now. And overall, a really nice, sturdy, fun package. For the right price, this can be a very compelling deal. We'll talk about price here in just a minute, but first, let's see what this thing can really do on 4S. Feels pretty quick, reasonably stable. Full throttle. Braking's a little weird, but not too bad. Full throttle again. All right, let's see what we got. Whoa. 47 miles an hour, that's not too bad. Let's go take it off the big ramp and see if we can break it. Well guys, this thing is a lot of fun and it's very tough. We did break it though, sort of. We'll talk about that in a minute, but before we do, we need to talk about price. This truck is obviously directly going after cars like the Arrma Granite. The Arrma Granite is currently $329 retail, or if you know where to look, a little bit cheaper than that. And according to MJX, when this thing goes on sale on Amazon, it's gonna be $399. Now, that comes with the 3S battery, and it's a decent 3S battery, but $399 is too expensive. There's no other way to put it. It's too much money. They are gonna have a coupon. I don't know what that coupon's gonna amount to, but I suspect it's still going to be too much money. However, there's good news, because it looks like from MJX and from places like Maker Faire, you're gonna be able to get this thing without the battery a lot cheaper. Maker Faire currently has a pre-order for this for $240. MJX looks like they're gonna be selling it for around $260. Of course, you're gonna be buying it from China if you do either one of those things, but I think there will be options that are much cheaper than the $399, whatever the coupon is, from Amazon. And at those prices, I think this makes a compelling option. By the way, if you did buy a V1, Maker Faire's got the entire V1 conversion kit for like 40 bucks, which isn't terrible for what you get. And speaking of isn't terrible, we did a bunch of bashing with this thing. I took a bunch of hard hits because this thing doesn't really land very well. It tends to bounce badly. The air control isn't the best. I think that's because these tires are too small and light for the weight of the vehicle. Bigger, heavier tires could definitely help, but we did mess up one thing. As you can see, this rear turnbuckle got pushed in on the outside on one of those hard landings. Fixing this would be as easy as unscrewing this to the right length again. However, once it happens once, it's probably going to happen again. Of course, replacements for something like this are cheap and they're fairly universal. You could probably use something off a Typhon or something like that. But other than that, this thing held together really, really well. I'm very impressed with its durability. It's plenty fast enough and it's a lot of fun. I do think it could definitely benefit from some suspension tuning. Like I said, the damping's way too stiff. Bigger tires would give it better air control, but it's still a really cool, tough truck, and especially if you can get it in that 240 to 260 range, it represents a great value for money. Speaking of representing great value, one of these videos should be really interesting to you.